Well, Sami Hamdi is editor-in-chief of the International Interest. He joins us now live from London. Hi, Sami. Thanks for speaking to us. You know, as I listened to Presidents Erdogan and Putin talk about what they'd agreed for Idlib, I couldn't help but think this is kind of repeating what they'd already agreed in agreements prior, and obviously those agreements weren't enforced. I mean, is it different this time in any way?
I don't think there's any difference this time round. I think this was more a political ploy in order to provide an exit for Erdogan and an exit for Putin out of this recent escalation, and to get the world to stop talking about this rift between Turkey and Russia. I think it was more a PR exercise. I think the ceasefire, it doesn't exist. We've already heard about violations with the ceasefire, but I think it was so that Turkey has something to show the Turkish people and say, look, we achieved something, and Putin can say to the Russians, look, we made Turkey back down. We managed to get a ceasefire as well. Moreover, if you notice, there's not much detail with regards to how this agreement will be implemented. We've heard about this de-escalation corridor 6 kilometers north of the M4 and 6 kilometers south of the M4. But anybody who looks at a map will notice a glaring thing that is not in Turkey's favor, which is suddenly it splits the rebel forces. It splits the opposition forces against Bashar al-Assad. You now have some opposition forces isolated to the south of that de-escalation corridor, which either means that they've been given up to the Assad regime, or that Turkey essentially did not find enough leverage to discuss with Russia on the de-escalation zone, or the third scenario, that both Turkey and Russia know that the agreement doesn't mean anything at all and that it's still all to play for in Syria. The package alluded to the fact that Assad regime has violated the ceasefire on numerous occasions, but it only does so when it knows that Russia will back it. So if Assad violates the ceasefire, it is the Russians as well who are violating the ceasefire.
That is a very important point you make there, because it was hard to reconcile listening to Putin yesterday express such sincere condolences for the Turkish troops that were killed, and effectively getting to play this card that even though we are the guarantor of the peace process in Syria, somehow we don't actually control the regime. Is Russia able to have it both ways?
I think the biggest dynamic for Russia, what went really well in Russia's favor, was actually Turkish public opinion. We all knew that the US and Europe would never come in to help the Turks, and France was liaising with Russia. Russia was relying on France to make sure that NATO doesn't intervene in favor of Turkey in the conflict. However, what really was the deciding factor was Turkish public opinion, the Turkish opposition saying that we prefer negotiations with Assad, and the illusion that they are not entirely on board with this military operation. When Erdogan saw that the Americans aren't with him, the Europeans aren't with him, and there's even a debate within Turkish public opinion on what are core interests for Turkey in Syria, Erdogan had little choice but to go to Moscow and to discuss and to emphasize this particular point about how Turkish opinion went against Erdogan, incredibly so, given how much is at stake for Turkey. Putin refused to come to Turkey and only agreed to meet Erdogan when he believed he had delivered a military defeat to Turkey by taking Sarakib. I think with regards to whether Russia will keep its side of the deal, what's working in Russia's favor is Turkish public opinion that doesn't seem to be on board with their president. Erdogan knows that Syria is a serious issue. Erdogan knows what needs to be done in Syria. Erdogan knows that he is the only power that is forcing the Russians to reconsider what they're doing in Syria. However, the reality is there is this very effective PR campaign via various different organizations and the like to convince the Turkish public that Erdogan is doing this for personal gain. And this is why I think this agreement was more a stopgap. Erdogan will return to Turkey. He'll try to clean up the house. I don't mean it in a negative way. I mean, he'll try to convince the Turks that, listen, this is very important for us. But in the meantime, Assad will take this stopgap to try to take as much opportunity as possible to take gains. And I want to make one final point with regards to this particular agreement, which is that when you look at the agreement, when you look at the de-escalation zone between the M4 and the M5, you notice that the only beneficiary is Russia. Russia, as part of retaking Idlib, wants to open up the M4 and the M5, and it managed to do so by this agreement. I think that Turkey is in a difficult position. It's isolated. It's been abandoned by the international community, which doesn't care about the refugees. It doesn't care about the humanitarian crisis in Syria. But now all eyes are on Turkey. I think, and I'll finish on this particular point. when Turkey launched its offensive in northern Syria, Syrians celebrated. They said, at last, there is a force that is attacking Assad. There is a force that is delivering that military defeat to Bashar al-Assad's forces. But Turkey is alone. Turkey is the only country fighting for the Syrian people in Syria. Now it's about the Turks. Will the Turks believe that it is incumbent on them to continue supporting the Syrians, or will they adopt what is known as the Ataturk isolationist policy, which is, listen, let's keep within our borders and only intervene insofar as our borders are affected? That's the question now Turkey has to ask itself.
Sami, very unfortunately, we're out of time. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much, as always, for joining us there from London.